In the silence beyond creation, where neither time nor space held sway, a shadow stirred. It was not the shadow of a man or a god, but the absence of all choice, all hope, all freedom. True Form Darkseid did not walk within the worlds, for worlds were but tiny flickers to him, motes of dust swimming in the void of his essence. His avatars fought justice leagues. His emanations crossed swords with gods and men, but those were only faint reflections cast into reality. The true Darkseid was not a warrior at all, but a truth that all things must bow, that all wills must break, that the inevitable end of every story was silence beneath his heel. He was anti-life incarnate, not simply a weapon but the principle of unmaking dressed in the form of a god. The multiverse itself trembled as he opened his unseen eyes, for to behold him was to feel freedom as a lie. Yet as this cosmic weight spread across infinite layers of being, another pulse resonated, not of despair but of defiance. A shape impossible to quantify flickered into existence, golden, radiant, armored, in a light that was not just physical but conceptual. It was not merely a protector, not simply a Superman who had grown stronger. It was the cosmic armor Superman, the thought robot, born of monitor machinery, designed not to fight with fists alone, but to fight with meaning itself. He was the safeguard against the end of narrative, the bulwark of story against the encroaching void, powered not by the sun or by Krypton's legacy, but by the imagination of the reader and the will of the story itself. He was the incarnation of what Superman meant, not merely who he was. The two presences had never met before in this purity. Darkseid had sought dominion over countless realities, yet his truest essence rarely stirred, for even his echoes were enough to enslave pantheons. Superman, even in his most infinite aspects, had never stood as he now did, stripped of all limitation, given the mantle of narrative defense. Their meeting was not a coincidence. It was inevitability meeting adaptation, anti-life against story life, the death of meaning against the unending rebirth of meaning. Darkseid's voice was not a sound but a truth that pressed itself into the mind like a brand. You are a lie written in defiance of inevitability. Stories end, free will dies, and I am that end, the proof that no tale can go on forever. Even gods fall to me, because the act of resistance itself is meaningless before certainty. You are a flicker in a book, whose pages close in darkness. Cosmic armor Superman stood tall, though his form was not bound by height or width. He gleamed with the impossible strength of countless interpretations, countless versions of Superman across universes, who had dreamed of victory, justice and hope. His voice carried not as a counter-truth, but as a narrative weight. You are powerful, Darkseid, because you represent the inevitability of despair. But I am not just one man, not even one god. I am the story of hope itself. Stories do not end in silence. They end in meaning, and meaning can shift. You are inevitability, but I am adaptation. I am the page turning when all seems lost, the impossible twist that keeps the narrative alive. You embody the end of choice, but I am choice. You embody inevitability, but I am the surprise that rewrites inevitability. You cannot win, because I am not playing your game. I am the reason there is a game at all. Darkseid's presence thickened, as if the void itself leaned closer. You misunderstand. I do not fight to win. I am the conclusion. All things bend toward entropy. Your victories are temporary. I do not need to strike you down, for I am the law of endings, and even stories must end. Cosmic armor Superman's helm reflected 1,000 shining worlds, each populated by men and women who had once read Superman, dreamed of him, believed in him, and yet here I am standing before you. Every time you say all must end, another story rises. Every time inevitability consumes a world, hope writes itself again. You are truth, Darkseid, but not the only truth. If you are the law of endings, I am the law of continuance. You say there must be silence. I say there must be a voice to cry out against it. That is why you will lose. Because even inevitability is still part of a story, and as long as there is a story, it can adapt, and as long as it can adapt, Superman will stand. For the first time, the void quivered as if struck by doubt, though Darkseid's form was incapable of doubt. He was inevitability, but inevitability met paradox here. For cosmic armor, Superman was not a man but a defense mechanism of creation itself, a narrative weapon designed to win against any concept of erasure. Their philosophies were oil and flame, absolute contradictions that demanded confrontation. The stage was not a battlefield of matter or energy, but of ontology, of meaning itself. And as Darkseid's anti-life bled across the foundations of creation, seeking to choke the very possibility of narrative rebellion, cosmic armor Superman stepped forward, the gleam of his armor fueled by every reader who had ever believed that Superman would triumph against impossible odds. The clash was inevitable now. It would not be a fight of fists and beams, though those would manifest. It would be a war of principles, of inevitability against narrative infinity. Only one could prevail, and in that triumph, the truth of the multiverse would be rewritten. Darkseid's form did not move in any conventional sense, for his true essence was beyond movement. Yet reality itself buckled as his anti-life surged, collapsing entire continuums in preparation for the strike. To lesser beings, the mere emanation of this truth would have ended all resistance, reducing them to hollow shells repeating Darkseid's will. But cosmic armor Superman did not falter. He raised his hand, and the golden plates of his body shone with the weight of 1 billion stories. His armor was not just steel, it was the collective dream that Superman always rises again. When Darkseid's anti-life equation reached for him, the thought robot bent, but did not break. His armor shifted, rewritten by the narrative of resistance, each movement a new page crafted in defiance of inevitability. They collided in a paradoxical battlefield, where landscapes formed and dissolved with each exchange. Darkseid's strike was not a punch, but a decree. You cannot win. The decree echoed as chains of inevitability wrapped around cosmic armor Superman, binding him in the iron logic that all will fails before anti-life. Yet with every link that bound him, Superman's story bent. Superman overcomes the impossible, whispered countless voices, not from his lips but from readers across all realities. The chains snapped, rewritten into threads of light, transformed into symbols of his strength. Darkseid's decree had met the invincible clause of story logic. The hero finds a way. The void shook as Darkseid roared, unleashing torrents of anti-life that swept through infinite dimensions. Entire civilizations across the multiverse fell silent, their wills extinguished, their stories truncated mid-sentence. Yet the thought robot adapted, his body expanding in narrative scale, his punches landing not on flesh but on concept. When his fist struck Darkseid, it was not merely a blow, it was the story of every Superman who had ever stood against darkness converging into one impact. The clash shattered dimensional membranes, and entire universes trembled as sparks of narrative energy and inevitability collided. Darkseid reached deeper, revealing the immensity of his true form. His presence was the end of gods, the extinction of myth, the collapse of pantheons. He did not tire, because inevitability has no need of stamina. He simply was, and his wasness threatened to consume Superman entirely. But cosmic armor Superman's helm gleamed, reflecting something greater, the reader turning the page, the writer's hand that refused to let the story end in despair. For every strike of inevitability, a counter-strike of narrative adaptation was born. Superman's power was not raw force but conceptual resilience. He could become exactly what was needed to triumph, because that was what his existence was for. The battle raged beyond eternity, until even the monitors could only watch in awe. With a final surge, Darkseid's anti-life equation condensed into a singularity, an ultimate decree. All ends. The words themselves could have collapsed the multiverse, stripping even Superman's story bare. But cosmic armor Superman stepped into the decree and did the impossible. He rewrote it. His armor lit up with every triumph across Superman's history, every child who had ever believed in him, every moment where hope had stood against despair. The decree cracked, and Superman's voice thundered. All continues. The shattering was absolute. Darkseid's form recoiled, the inevitability of his presence forced back. He did not die, for concepts cannot die. But he was denied. His truth met a greater truth, that as long as there is story, there is hope, and as long as there is hope, Superman cannot fall. Cosmic armor Superman stood victorious, not by overpowering Darkseid, but by proving that inevitability itself was just another chapter in a story that never ends. And so the void was filled with light once more. Darkseid's essence sank back into the abyss, still inevitable, still waiting, but denied this day. Superman's armor gleamed, his victory not just his own but that of every story that had ever defied despair. For in the clash of inevitability and infinity, it was not the end that triumphed, but the story that would always continue.